Everyone, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce to you Ambassador Jamsheed Marker, also my uncle. Uncle Jamsheed is going to talk a little bit about, well, they're going to ask him questions about his long and distinguished civil service career in Pakistan. Before that, many of you don't know, he was also the voice of Radio Pakistan in relation to cricket. So you can ask him about his cricket commentary days in the 50s and early 60s. When we open it up to the floor, any other question you might have, Uncle Jamsheed served in more countries as an ambassador than any other living ambassador to date, which included countries like Germany, the US, the UK, Russia, France, Japan, and a host of others which I can't remember. I've said all of these. And then for many years, as our ambassador to the United Nations, he served as the president of the Security Council when Pakistan was a member of the UN Security Council. He has also taught. He has been teaching as a professor at Eckerd College in Florida for the past so many years. He has retired finally and come to Karachi, and please give him a round of applause.
Okay, sir. It's a great pleasure and honor to have you here today. Let's start with this interview with one of your conversations with Henry Kissinger. He quoted to you and he said, "Everywhere else in the world, elections help to solve problems. In Pakistan, they seem to create them." What do you have to say about democracy in Pakistan?
Well, Kissinger also said to Yahya Khan after the 1970 elections, which were the first free and fair elections we had in Pakistan, said that for a military dictator, Mr. President, you run a lousy election. But no, I think he had a point there, but a little exaggerated in the way that Kissinger likes to make these points. But the fact remains that that particular election resulted in the breakup of Pakistan. And so he did have a point. One can go into that as to why it happened. I think we all know why it happened. I think what we're seeing today is still the residue of that, that beautiful German word, Schadenfreude, of sadness and sort of happiness that exists. Because 2 days ago, the whole of Bangladesh was rooting for Pakistan in the cricket match. So in that sense, and it also took me back, and I put this in my book, about the time when I was in East Berlin, and I had come there before the Bangladesh ambassador, who then came, and he called on me, and he'd been a politician. He worked for Pakistan, the freedom struggle for Pakistan. He came and he saw a picture that we had, Quaid-e-Azam of Jinnah, in my office. And the moment he saw that, he became so emotional. He just sat down, he held my hand, we sat on the sofa, and he said, "Don't talk to me. I haven't seen that portrait for 5 years or whatever it is. Let me just gaze at it." And then he said, "If that man had lived, either you would have been here or I would have been here. Both of us would not have been here together." So these are the kind of emotions that one can't forget. On the other hand, today I haven't been to Bangladesh, but if you go there, it is different. It's a different country. They're doing very well. In spite of what Kissinger said, the basket case, they had managed to pull themselves up. And they've taken, I think, certain very important steps, and that is to try and restore democracy.
Okay, let's in 70s we can term that military to some extent might have been responsible for dividing Pakistan or breaking Pakistan. But in 80s when ZMF Bhutto was negotiating with PNA, if you would have been the advisor of ZMF Bhutto and during those negotiations with PNA, what would have been your advice to him?
In the 80s,
Yeah.
I happened to be in Islamabad when he was doing those negotiations, because I was in Tokyo and he was due to come on an official visit to Tokyo, and I was coming there for the previous for consultations before we came on to Tokyo. And of course I waited and waited, couldn't get an appointment with him because he was so busy in these negotiations. And I saw him as a cornered man, that he was, he suddenly found himself dealing with people with whom he didn't expect to deal or thought he had dealt. And it was sad, it was difficult, and what could I advise him? I mean, he was the politician. I was I was just the diplomat there. But there was no doubt that I got the impression that he had been negotiating with Brezhnev because now here he was mixed up with these guys, and he didn't. He seemed at a loss, and that is as far as I could see. In terms of what could I advise him, he was obviously the best at that. But time had come when things were changing, and that, like happens to so many of us so often, you overreach just when you think that you're invincible. And the laws of politics and international relations are very, very inexorable and unforgiving.
Oh, sir, on that point, you have been to Canada as well. You served as an ambassador to Canada, and you've been to Poland as well. And during
I haven't served in Poland. I've been to Poland.
Been to Poland. But during the Cold War era, you might have noted, Canada and Poland both maintained the policy of neutrality. They weren't taking sides both with the Soviets or with the US. What would have been the implementations on Pakistan if during the Cold War era Pakistan followed the same policy of neutrality?
To what extent could you follow the policy of neutrality?
For instance, we wouldn't have gone for the United States, or we wouldn't have followed the Soviet agenda on the basis exceptional of the AIDS, but we wouldn't have followed the dictations to an extent. Like if you have been, while you were the ambassador at Tokyo, you had the MiG crisis. The Soviet MiG landed there and on the Japanese soil, and the US government, the Japanese government provided them with the political asylum. On the other hand, we had few of U-2 flights. They had flown from Peshawar and Islamabad, and the way they reacted towards us, what would have been if we would have remained neutral? Because we were flushed in the U-2 crisis, then later on we were flushed in the One crisis. Wouldn't it have been a changed Pakistan if we would have remained neutral?
What was our position on Vietnam?
We weren't ready to extension. We were ready to support them, but we were, due to the Chinese affiliation, we never wanted to drag in war.
You see, there you are. It's a matter of having to balance. There are no permanent friends. There are only permanent interests.
Friends not really must.
It's we who I think Pakistanis more than, lots of Orientals, but Pakistanis more than others, have this thing that doston ke dost. Well, that's all very well between Premji and me, but in the case of nations, it's your national interest that comes first, and remember that the other guy feels the same way too, that it's his national interest that comes first. So, it's a question of what is in your national interest. Now, the perception may be different. You may be wrong on that, you may pick the wrong choice, you may pick the wrong friend, you may pick the wrong enemy. But the concept should be basically that what is your national interest? What's in your national interest? Forget about sentimentality, forget about, the Islamic Ummah, forget about all of that. As far as Pakistan is concerned, for God's sake, concentrate on Pakistan. Never mind about the other things. Nobody else is going to think about you except you yourself. And any political leader in this country that takes his eye off that ball is going to be right. So don't go running after friends and imagining friends and supporting friends and taking on enemies. That's not in your interest. Your interest is your own self-survival and how you can best attend to it.
Okay. So in June 1970, Yahya Khan paid a visit to USSR. And there were two main things on the agenda. The first was the Pakistan steel mill, which the Russian leaders to an extent agreed that they would go ahead with it and they will provide the finances. The second biggest thing was the Russian military aid, and Yahya was really concerned about it, but the Foreign Office advised them that they won't go for it. While Yahya was at the airport and he was about to leave, he had the final discussion with the Russian leaders, and he came to you and said, we will get the aid. What went wrong later on?
I never figured that out because it was my, not so much the Foreign Office, but it was my advice to you that do not talk about military aid. Just concentrate on the steel mill and let's take it from there. After that, everything else. You see, in those days, the Soviets, they were great believers in personality. Ayub Khan had been there and had impressed them very much, Kosygin particularly, after Tashkent and all of that. So he had got a commitment for some tanks to come out. And then everything changed over here. The Soviets were very worried that at that time Bashani was getting very powerful in East Pakistan. They knew his connections with China. The Soviets hated the Chinese more than they hated anybody else at that time. So they were not prepared until they knew what was going to happen in Pakistan. So I told Yahya that, look, don't go chasing after this. Let's concentrate on what we can get and take it from there. And he agreed. And that was more or less what we did. So throughout our discussions, we never raised the issue. And on the last day, when we were coming back from Leningrad actually, in the train, they came to me, two different people who had gone to this interview, and said that you were talking about arms and you haven't raised the issue at all. And so I told Famil that, quite frankly, I didn't see the point. You know your position. So he said, don't you think it's important? I said, it was. He said, then why don't you speak to the president? So I did. And then Yahya, when we went to the airport and we kept waiting outside, and Gurney and Kosygin said something to Yahya. When I went to say goodbye to him on the plane, he said, look, I'll send you a message, everything's gone very well. Got instructions that, take up this matter. The Soviets stalled on that. Then we had those cyclones in East Pakistan. And they fobbed me off. They went to Marshal Grechko and he gave me a whole lot of helicopters to help in the rescue operations. But they kept pushing this back. Now, Yahya never being less than himself, when he came back, he always went to GHQ and said, look, I've got those tanks, guys, and we're all set to go. So then he was furious when this thing didn't come through. This is one of those, lucky, an ambassador sometimes has to have luck. Because if I had reported, if they had said it to me, and I had reported that they're prepared to give it to you, and they hadn't showed up, then I wouldn't be here today. I'd be somewhere else. But they actually said it, and they let him down.
Okay.
That's all they did.
You, Mr. Ambassador, USSR was really interested in what was happening in the East Pakistan, and they kept warning Yahya. Why do you think Yahya never took those warnings and those early signs that USSR was giving? Was he the man in uniform? That's why, or like he felt that the problem isn't that serious?
I think it was something that happened here. He was, initially when he took over, I got the impression that he had quite a good sense of what was happening in the country. That he managed that bit quite well. But afterwards, I think that he was completely out of his league when dealing with Bhutto and Muji. I mean, they just, by then they got the bit between their teeth and there's nothing.
Well, you were the ambassador there in USSR, and you were in Islamabad when Yahya called you, and he shared you that for me it might be a huge secret that he was involved in facilitating ties between US and China. I think he also phrased it like you're sitting on a volcano and you should know about it.
Yeah.
What was your reaction, like keeping Sino-Soviet ties in view?
I thought that this was a very exciting thing that he was doing. It was a historic turnaround in the 20th century. Because I mean post-war war. Because until then, the situation was kind of tripolar. The Soviets hated the Chinese and they hated the Americans. The Americans hated the Soviets and the Americans hated the Chinese. And the Chinese hated the Soviets and the Chinese hated the Americans. None of them had this relationship was a mutually tripolar, antipathetic relationship. And suddenly, overnight, this polarity was being changed. And for the Soviet planners, this could not have been a greater strategic nightmare. It was as though you have a nightmare and then you wake up in the morning and find that it's the reality. That your two enemies have got together. And now what do I do? And the time was, of course, when the Soviets and the Chinese, the hatred between, when I was there, the distrust and hatred between the Chinese and the Soviets was far greater than it was between the Soviets and the Americans, or the Soviets and the Chinese one speaking that time. And here again, let's go back. We stood up to the Americans and the Soviets over China. We were not, we as you know, PIA was the only service that could go to Beijing as it was then. We were the only ones who had communications there. And in order to operate our planes there, we needed to keep spares in Beijing. We were not allowed to do that because they were American parts, and under the US terms, you could not put them in. So we used to have to carry an extra tire and an extra battery and extra everything in the aeroplane, just to keep this thing going. But the That's just a physical manifestation of it. But this was something that we stood up to, because of China. And here I think it's very, very important when we talk about the future that I believe that our interests are with China. It's changing very much now, and I'm really sorry to see that we do not have that depth of relationship that we used to have with China at one time. And this is something that was started a long time ago. It wasn't started by Bhutto, it was started by Suravarti. It was Shahid Suravarti who first saw the importance of the Chinese. It was the first, he was the man who did it. He even did it by bringing in Chinese restaurants on Elphinstone Street. But he said it's important, that this was the relationship which he thought was so important to build up. Long before, when everybody else. He stood up to the Americans, and after the Bhutto and the Yugos, everybody came. But, and the Chinese for a long time didn't think that. Now, of course, although generations have gone, everything has changed. But you should continue to remember that in terms of our interests, China is very, very important.
Okay, Mr. Ambassador, there was Yahya who was ruling the whole united Pakistan, both the east and the west wing. By 70s, we were divided in two. There was New Bangladesh there. India took captive our 90,000 soldiers. They took a few of the land from the Run of Kutch. By March 1972, Z.A. Bhutto visited USSR, Russia, and he laid the foundations of Simla, if I'm not wrong, Simla agreement. You might not be there, you weren't there in India while this whole agreement was being inked between Indira and Z.A. Bhutto. But what do you think was the turning point that made Indira change her mind, and she had finally agreed to return our men the land, and she finally agreed to ink the Simla agreement? What do you think was the turning point?
The meeting in the Kremlin.
No, the Simla agreement, specifically. Yeah.
That's where it began.
Yeah.
It began in the meeting in the Kremlin between Bhutto and Brezhnev, at which I was present, and at which the decision was taken that we should, in fact, it was said that, now the situation has changed. I need to, we can't go back to the old situation. It was he who, for the first time, until then it was called the ceasefire line. And he said, now let's call it the line of control. So there was that basic diplomatic change. And following that, it was the pressure from the Soviets and Brezhnev on Indira Gandhi to persuade this. Now, this I think was probably Bhutto's finest hour, in my view. It was also his contribution to the creation of the mess was not inconsiderable, but I think it was his finest hour in the sense that he had nothing in his hands. He got, and yet he retrieved all of this through sheer diplomatic negotiating skills. He got his priorities right. He said, the prisoners, emotional, I have friends there, everybody else there, people want them coming back. How long is she going to hold on to them and go on feeding those guys? How does it help us? Land, I've got to get back. Those bloody foolish Arabs are still waiting for their land. They haven't got it yet. First priority, get your territories back. Then move on to the next. There was not a whole, and then Following that, condition was recognition of Bangladesh. Very difficult to achieve. As Brezhnev said, that 30 countries have already recognized Bangladesh. And Bhutto said, yes, but they haven't been divided. So there was that. So give that, he had the correct prioritization.
Okay, sir. Z.A. Bhutto has one huge achievement under his umbrella. You might say that he was the father of Pakistan's nuclear program. In 1974, he called a huge meeting of ambassadors from all over the world, and they were sitting there, Pakistani ambassadors, and you were one of them. Who was there present in that conference in Paris. The news came that India has finally gone for the nuclear explosions, and when the news was given to Z.A. Bhutto, what was his reaction, and what did he had the plan to counter? How he had the plan to counter it back?
Actually, it was in Rome, not in Paris. And when he came, he again had the correct thing, that take it easy, keep cool, don't go issuing. Where again he was right, because there were enough countries in the world who were indignant at what India had done. Starting with the Canadians, who were giving them everything. There was a very close understanding between Lester Pearson and Nehru, and also between the atomic energy chiefs. So the Canadians had given the Indians everything, in the belief that, it will all be peaceful use and that kind of thing. So when this happened, of course, people, there was a great disillusionment. So here again, he played it cool. He said, let's play it cool. The others are going to be telling them, our turn will come. Don't let's get involved. So that was the immediate reaction at that time. That is what we decided to do. I'm not even sure that we issued a statement. I can't remember, but I don't think we did. We left it to the rest of the world to do that. So there was no big problem with that. But what did happen, which I found out much later, was Senator Chuck Percy, who was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and a very good friend of mine. He flew immediately to Indira Gandhi and told her what a terrible thing she has done, and said that you have now opened the subcontinent to the nuclear risk. That there is no way in which anyone would be able to stop Pakistan and others following suit. You had no need to do this, etc. He said, but she was totally unmoved. He knew her very well, and he said she just didn't give a damn.
Okay, sir. You served in United Nations as well. My first question to you will be, what your take is on giving veto power to five other nations, while the main objective of United Nations was that is going to resolve conflicts and going to resolve wars among nations, and they're going to come on this platform and going to use it to ease their situations that they have. Now, if you're giving veto power to five different nations, and then you expect an organization to come and to resolve problems, will that work? Do you think was that successful enough by giving veto powers to 5 different nations?
Yeah, eminently practical, eminently correct. If that had not been done, then the United Nations would have gone the way the League of Nations did, and nothing to do. It was, see, in 1945, there were only 45 countries who were members of the United Nations. And they what we had before us historically was the League of Nations. And under the covenant of the League of Nations, every member of the League was bound to come to the military aid of any other member who was attacked. No questions asked. And our friend, the American president, Wilson, with his 14 points, in fact, when he put out his 14 points, Clemenceau said that even God Almighty only had 10. But he couldn't get Congress to pass it because the Americans did not want to get involved in a war in Europe. They said, who the hell he's going to drag us into a war? We've already come out of one world war. So the League of Nations, as a result of that, completely, it was disappeared. It was invaded, the Spanish Civil War, and you had World War II. So the framers of the Charter had to guarantee that the institution that we put up would be able to withstand the realities of political life and not some academic, and therefore they took the practical realities, which were the 5 winning powers, and said, okay, if their vital interests are affected, then they can stop it on that particular issue. And that gave them the assurance, and that enabled the beginning of the United Nations to be formed. After that, you got all these other institutions, World Food Organization, the UNDP, everything else came after that. Today, you can't live in this world without the United Nations. You go to an airline office and buy a ticket to take you from here to London. You immediately trigger something like 6 or 7 UN conventions resolutions. You can fly over territories without any permission. You can land where you want to. You can do this. The food you eat in the plane, the airline signals, everything. The whole thing. All of these institutions were subsequently built. Now, the Security Council remained deadlocked as a result of this veto. People couldn't use it. But it allowed the other institutions to take it. And so now, today, you have, smallpox is eradicated from the world. You name it, everything, the World Health Organization. Today, really nowhere in the world can people die of starvation, unless, even if it's man-made, because there are always resources. The food reserves are there, the means are there for sending it from Italy or NATO, whatever it is. All of those organizations subsequently grew up as a result of this veto.
Sir, could you talk about the human rights work that you did at the UN, given that Pakistan has signed both the convents, the socio-economic and cultural, as well as the civil and political rights. Talk about how Pakistan began complying with these treaties.
There are the usual bureaucratic procedures for it. The Human Rights Commissions meet, and you have these delegations go out and have a good time in Geneva and attend these conferences, and they report back and say, "Humne ye kiya," and we've got. So it's not. It's a kind of a watchdog which gradually increases your thing. But that is a shall I put it, kind of incremental. The real purpose of this is that before 1945, the word human rights didn't exist in the international vocabulary. There was nobody ever talked about human rights. This whole thing came out with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1945, which Eleanor Roosevelt did. For the first time, that the concept of human rights became a matter of importance. Until then, the law of the old supremacy, national sovereignty, was which is the basis of the membership of the United Nations now. But that is what it did. So there has been this gradual shift now onto this emphasis on the rights of people, on human rights. And of course, the decolonization that took place, that this whole thing started.
So how has Pakistan's track record been up after signing these bills?
I would say that in the lower half of the world, a great deal needs to be done, and we are particularly bad in the case of equal rights for women. The laws are there, their implementation, and I've sat on these human rights commissions things, and the nonsense that some of our delegates speak there. You won't get out of the room, but it's the things that come there that the ministry puts up in the notes, and they put that and they give it there. I used to feel very unhappy about that. But the fact remains that our human rights record is I would say, in the lower half. Very much in the lower half.
Okay, being a diplomat, you've been all over the world and you've had access to a lot of art. And you've been promoting local artists. So can you, one of the artists that you remember, or some art that inspired you, can you talk about that?
One to whom I went crashing down on my knees was Faisal, who used to come regularly to us in Moscow. And the other, I was very fortunate, Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. He was comparatively unknown abroad, and when he came to Paris, and I was there, and I had some friends in Radio France, and I took him and I introduced him, and I thought we would do one concert and it would be over. He just caught fire. So I'm very proud of that.
During the 70s, when the Indo-Pak ties were pretty shaky, and you had a conversation, you met with the Indian Chief of Staff, General Manik Shaw, and you had a conversation with him in Gujarati, which the Russians were very curious about. What did you say to him?
No, I can't. I just enjoyed it because, the Soviets were giving me a hard time, Pakistan ambassador. So I saw this thing and I thought that I'd tweak a little bit. And he's a very good friend, and we went there. It was at the Bolshoi, and he was surrounded by all these Soviet generals. And they always induct, one or two Hindi-speaking people in the delegation, in their group, so that they know what they're talking about. And I could see these KGB guys, you could recognize them. I saw him and saw my wife. He kissed her. We hugged each other, and that took them by surprise. That because everyone knew who was who, and. Then we started talking. Then I saw that they were wondering what. So we instinctively spoke in Gujarati to each other, and I could see the horror on their faces. And so after that, I think in the Foreign Office, the head of my department was very senior in the KGB, a very fine man from India, and he told me that I believe you met the Indian Army chief, and I said yes. So he said, well, what did you talk about? So So I said, didn't your people tell you? And they had no Gujarati speakers.
So lastly, as an ambassador, one has to present its credentials to the president or the highest public office of the country. Any pleasant memories of yours while you were there as a ambassador?
You know, most of them are pure formality. Your speech is made out, his speech is made out. Sometimes they're said, sometimes they're not. You give these things, you hand over what you call your credentials and take away and resignation of your predecessor, recall of your predecessor. That's the formality that has to be done. This is a part of the whole international. That's how international law is carried out. Sometimes you have a substantial discussion. Most times you don't. In the case of Ghana, in the case of Nkrumah, in the African ones, I did. In the case of Moscow, we went, and then the head of the deputy foreign minister then took over the conversation because the other guy was a pure. In the case of Tokyo, the emperor just said you should take good care of your health, and that's all that we talked about. But it varies from country to country, depending on what the situation is.
It was very pleasure to have you and honored.
I think we're going to open it up to questions from the audience.
Yeah, I got my back to the wall so far away.
Can I ask you one question? It's when Shaykh Bhutto went for the nuclear, the American, because he to fight them, they need American. Actually, Kissinger said, if you go through that, I will make a horrible sentence. I don't recall reading any of the books, but is it true?
I haven't seen it. I mean, I've heard it reported that they said they will make a horrible example of you. And I think it was actually Bhutto himself who said that he was said to him. But I've not seen any record of that. And as far as in my conversation with Kissinger, he has never mentioned that. What Kissinger said to me was that what you did to Bhutto was very wrong. And that was, I mean, he was very strong on that. But there was no mention of that. And I think this whole nuclear program has been consistently pursued by all our governments.
Yes.
There is no doubt. I mean, who started it? If you really want to go back, I think it's a man called Dr. Usmani, who used to be at one time the chief controller of imports and exports, and who's realized, he said the important thing is, let's get into the science technology. He used to get scholarships from all over and send people all over for this. So it's not, you know, in that sense, it was, but the decision, the political decision to take it, I think no doubt was taken at the time of Bhutto's, when he called all the scientists following this thing. And here again, it was a response to the Indian action. For a long time, Ayub was opposed to the nuclear thing. He said it's much more important that we have agriculture, that we feed ourselves, that we, are we going to eat a nuclear bomb? What are we going to do? He used to say that. For a long time he concentrated on that. And in fact, at one stage, there was talk of the Soviets were going to give us a nuclear reactor in East Pakistan, which Ayub turned down. Partly because I think he didn't want one there, but partly because he was not. So, but it was after that, and the people who really concentrated on this were after that were Ziaul Haq, Ghulam Ishaq Khan, and they put the iron, the organization, the resources, and they guarded it like real bulldogs. Nobody was allowed near it, and they kept it. They lied, they cheated, they did everything for it. There was a meeting between Armitage and Armacost. They went to see Zia. This was at the time of the Geneva Accords. And the first day their meeting was on the nuclear issue. And they told me that we took this up, and Zia looked us in the eye and lied to us and said he's not doing it. And we knew he lied to us. The next day, they went to discuss this question of arms into Afghanistan, what they called those days negative symmetry and positive symmetry. How much should go in, how much should not go in. And Ziaul Haq wanted to get as much Asala into Afghanistan before the Geneva Accord came down. So he said, send it to me, send me, I'll get it. And they said to him that, but you have signed the Geneva Accords and prohibiting this. And so Zia looked him in the eye and said, leave that to me, I'll do it. In Islam, it is permissible to lie for a greater cause. Then, after they left him, they said, the bastard lied to us on both occasions in the greater cause of Islam. Right. So it was that, but they did it with this. They didn't make money out of it. They didn't make, they did it in order to ensure some form of balance on the subcontinent.
You mentioned how sentiment cannot be allowed, must not be allowed to interfere with the interests of the nation state. And yet we find that history, that sentiment often seeps into and is allowed to, and this is especially true of textbooks and about written history. Textbooks as they are taught in our education system, that sentiment is allowed to seep in, and so our history is rewritten and misrepresented and appropriated and distorted often. Could you comment on this, please?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question you raised. There is a difference between sentiment and ideology. A state has to be motivated. There has to be some reason, why do people get together? What is it that they want to do? They want freedom, they want people, all of those, that is the ideological aspect of it, and the way we get it. The sentiment is when you let your immediate feelings overcome and prevent you from seeing things as perhaps you need to in order to have your...
What I'm talking about is that we often allow the sentiments of our elected leaders, or elected or non-elected, to every government comes in and changes the history that is written in the history books to allow it to better fit its own sentiments and its own ideologies. Could you comment on that?
I think that's deplorable, because from that way you will never learn. You will never learn from your mistakes, and more important, you will be destroying what really should be the sources of pride in your history. What has brought you there? Why have we been trying to censor Jinnah's speech? Why are we trying to forget when he said, go to your temples, go to your mosques? Well, yes, that is something that is a call for, that's a cause of pride. Why are people trying to hide that? Why are they ashamed about it? This is wrong. It should not be done. And by the same token, if you have done some things that are wrong, then the best way to correct it is to realize it, recognize it, and make sure you don't do it again. Of course, the greatest example of this is Nelson Mandela. When I met Mandela, East Timor thing, I'd been there when I came. We had a press conference, and we talked about East Timor. But then I spoke to him, and I said to him that, you know, when you walked out of that Robben Island prison, and what were your feelings? Did you not have a hatred for the people who locked you up for 25 years, made you break stones, kept you over there, and killed so many of your people? Did you not, what were your feelings? And he said, you know, as I walked out of there, and I looked over my shoulder at that gate of Robben Island, I had exactly these feelings, that I hated people for what they did to me. And then he said, as I went on walking, I said, the longer I have this hatred, I will still be in that prison. If I am to get out of that prison, I have to get it out of my mind. And single-handedly, otherwise there would have been such a massive bloodbath in South Africa that it was unimaginable. But he decided that it should not be that way. And then we went to this press conference where just the previous day, the clerk with whom we had made the negotiations agreement had resigned as the head of the party. And somebody asked him to comment on that. And he said, well, that's a internal matter for the party itself. It's got nothing to do with us. But let us never forget de Klerk's contribution to the new South Africa. You see, he was generous to his opponent, and that immediately led to this reconciliation. Now, it's not just a reconciliation, but a realization of past errors and things that have been done. So everyone not lucky enough to get, and here again, come back to Nelson Mandela. When he came here, afterwards he went all over the world to all the countries that had supported him and helped him to thank them. And somebody, I was not present here, but I think in Islamabad, somebody asked him that why can't we in Pakistan have had a Nelson Mandela? And he said, but you have. For years, I have admired Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Have you forgotten him? That was it. So, you know, these are, we need to be honest with ourselves. There is too much of, hiding and pretending that we should realize that we're not, as a country we're great, but we're not we're not in the Super League, and even if you are, you can make a lot of mistakes and things will go wrong. But it's important that there should be accountability, and that people, that we should elect people who are prepared to render themselves accountable. I think that's really all I don't know if it answers your question.
I think we take one more question, Krishna.
I have a question. You have traveled all over the world, almost. Not as a politician, but as a traveler, how has been your experience throughout?
As a what?
As a traveler, how has it been your experience? Do you yeah.
As a traveler?
Yeah.
It gets more and more difficult with the Pakistani passport. But no, I'm joking. It's fascinating. It's getting more complicated, more difficult now. But it all depends on what is your attitude. If you want to travel, unfortunately, as so many people do, to go into the shops, then you will see exactly the same shops in exactly the same capitals all over the world. You want to buy expensive handbags or shoes, or you want to. But if you can get a chance to meet people, then it's very rewarding. And if you happen to be lucky to be able to speak the language or understand it, and English is a great help in that. I'm really sorry now that English is not being spoken. Everywhere else in the world, people are learning. The Chinese are learning English, and everybody is learning English. It's got nothing to do with colonialism. It's got nothing to do with. It is simply a useful tool. Today, you can't fly anywhere in the world without English. All the airline communications are in English. So it's a matter of different English in different ways. It's on your computers. It's on your. So I think it's important that we should just take that. That's the way the world is. We use English as we use computers. But the idea is to try and speak to people and get their languages and their customs. And then you will find great delight, because things are, you find there's so much in common. Even small things like language. I was in Romania, for example. I made a little glossary of something like 60 words, which were the same in Romanian as they were in Urdu. Not food, not dishes like pilau and kebab and that kind of thing, but actually words coming through Turkish. Words like dushman, maidan, sanduk, chashma, the fountain, main fountain in Bucharest is called Chashmashu. Chai, chai is like, it's a Chinese really, it's like, it's a food thing, that one can understand, pilau and chai, that kind of thing. But then there were other words which were very interesting, like musafir. In Romanian, musafir means guest. It's the other musafir, I have guest. Whereas in our case it means travelers, and they are quite close. Now this, obviously this link was through Turkish, because we had a common thing. So that kind of thing is very fascinating that you find, if you can get to. That's one of the great fascinations of travel.
So finally, it was a great pleasure, and it was an honor to have you here today at ZABIST. And
Thank you.